All right, so I've given analogies before, and not exactly this one, but this is sort of another analogy of why your cells need ATP to begin with. So if we think about the bonds in sugar, we've got all this energy that's stored in those bonds, because remember, energy is not created or destroyed, but it's passed along. So we've got this energy that's trapped in the bonds. And if you think of the energy that's trapped in sugar as like a $100 bill, but your cell has all these different rides all over the place, and each ride needs $1 in order to run. And you need all those rides running at the same time to keep the cell alive. Obviously, having that one sugar with all that energy trapped in one spot is not going to help you. So what you need to do is you need to release the energy from the sugar and release it in such a way that you could send little packets of that energy to all the different rides, and that way everything could be running at once. And that's the idea of how ATP is going to become important in your cells. It's going to transfer energy from a large energy source to all these little places where smaller amounts of energy are needed. So this is almost identical, this little section, to the last chapter. So we've got potential energy that we're going to call chemical energy, and it's trapped in the bonds. This includes not just sugar, although glucose is the most common one that we talk about. When we learn about cell respiration, we're going to learn all the steps of cell respiration using glucose as the energy source. At the very end of the lecture, though, we're going to go back and we're going to talk about how you could also use protein, you could also use lipids, you can use other carbohydrates, and you'll see how all of them can feed into the same process. It's just that glucose is the way your body's designed. It's designed to use glucose as the main energy source. Numbers are not important. Memorizing that a mole of glucose releases almost 700 kilocalories of energy is not important. What you need to understand is what the number means. It means that that's how much energy is trapped. That if I break down a mole of glucose, delta G for that reaction is a negative number, a large negative number. So there's a lot of stored energy that could then be released to then become heat, to run other reactions, to be used for something else. To build glucose is the opposite. If you wanted to build glucose, like what photosynthesis does, it requires almost 700 calories of energy. It's a positive delta G. Where does the energy come from to build glucose in photosynthesis? The sun. Right, the sunlight brings in the energy, provides the energy to actually make ATP actually as an intermediate, and then build the glucose to begin with. Okay, so the way that ATP works, and this is really the only thing we're going to talk about today, is the main way we build ATP is through what are called redox reactions. I mentioned this back in the basic chemistry notes, and it's kind of unfortunate that they kind of throw redox at you as if it's something you learned in chemistry. Because the truth of the matter is, in regular chemistry, you never, ever, ever talk about redox reactions.
Or in honors chemistry.
Or in honors, only in AP. So they throw it in basic chemistry as if it's something I just need to briefly mention and you're going to know what it is. And you're not, unless you've had AP Chem already. But for purposes of what we're going to do, you don't need to know a lot about redox reactions. What you need to know is what I told you back in that first lecture on it, is oil rig. Oxidation is loss, reduction is gain. So anything in a reaction, if I look at a reaction and I clearly see that something has lost an electron, it has become oxidized. Oxidation is loss. And if something gains an electron, it has become reduced. And I'm going to show you an actual reaction so that you can see what I mean, that we can literally label something as becoming oxidized in a reaction or reduced in a reaction. The important thing you want to know here is that it has nothing to do with oxygen. Oxidized has nothing to do with oxygen at all, which seems kind of confusing.
Isn't oxidized like when stuff rusts?
Rust is oxidizing, and oxygen, it happens to be involved in rusting because oxygen is the agent by which it's happening. But yes, oxidation has to do with the oxidation number of something going up. And if the oxidation number goes up, it's oxidized, and if it goes down, it's reduced. So that's where the word oxidation comes from. But it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to learn it that way in here. What you really need to know in here is just that oxidation has to do with losing electrons and reduction is gaining. So in the case of generating ATP, what we're going to see is these redox reactions are going to pass the electrons to things that are more electronegative. Another big word that was tossed out to you in the basic chemistry lecture. Electronegativity has to do with how hard something really wants to pull electrons towards it, to gain electrons. Anybody remember, does it get higher as you go to the right or the left on the table?
Yes. It goes to the right.
Correct. Fluorine's like the highest on the whole
Yeah.
table. It really wants that one more electron, it's going to have 8. So if you think about it, if something really wants electrons, it doesn't need as much energy to hold on to them because it's like naturally attracting. You know, if you're really ugly, it's harder to hold on to your boyfriend. If you're really attractive, he's going to want to hang around. It's not a problem. So the more it wants electrons, the less energy it needs to actually hold on to those electrons. And the point is that if we imagine this is some substance, and this is another substance, and this is another substance, and we have this little electron, I'll just do it in red, and this one pretty much, the electron's more attracted to this one, so it goes to here. But then it sees this one, and now the electron goes to here. We basically have redox reactions. This was reduced. Now it's oxidized, and this one becomes reduced. And then when it gives the electron away, it's now oxidized, and this one's reduced. That's what a redox reaction is. It's just passing of an electron. And since this one is the sexiest, it doesn't need as much energy to hold on to that electron. So literally what will happen is, as the electron's getting passed along, little bits of energy can be released here because we don't need as much energy for the electron to be here. And then it needs even less to be held here. And this is where we're going to generate our ATP. By passing the electrons on, we're literally going to release little bits of energy. Rather than blowing up your gas tank, you're going to release it in little steps. And that's how we're going to make that change to run little reactions. So, and it'll make more sense as we go. So let's just take a look at a couple of redox reactions, and then we'll stop. All right, so here's a sample. So if I was to give you a very simple reaction like this, here's what you would need to know. If I ask you what is oxidized in this reaction, you'd want to find what lost an electron. Hopefully you remember enough from chemistry to remember that when it loses an electron, it gets a positive charge. So whichever one became positive, that's going to be your oxidized one. I did not mean to do that. Let me go back. There we go. All right, so in this case, our sodium lost an electron. So our sodium became oxidized, and the electron had to go somewhere. This is why it's called redox, because they got to happen in a pair. This is what got the electron, so this became reduced. And I could write any reaction up here, and if you could clearly see charges moving to where one became positive and one became negative, the one that lost an electron is going to be your oxidized one, and the one that gained an electron is going to be your reduced one. So that's the first way you could see a reaction where you could be asked what got oxidized, what got reduced. It'll be very, very straightforward. You literally just look for the charges. The one that became positive is oxidized. The one that became negative is reduced. Make sense? Okay, there's one other way you can see it where it's not as obvious as this. But if you know what to look for, you won't have a problem. So let me show you the other situation. This is just another drawing of the same thing, showing they're actually drawing an electron in and saying, okay, look, this one, the electron left and it went to here, but don't worry about that. Here's the one that's confusing. So this is the actual reaction for cell respiration. You've seen it before. So here's our glucose plus oxygen, and it breaks down into 6 carbon dioxide, 6 waters, and then we generate some energy. Now, you don't see any charges here, so you can't just look and go, okay, so what turned positive, what turned negative? But hydrogen has exactly 1 electron. So if you see an organic reaction like this one, all you have to do is follow the hydrogens. Remember, oxidation is a loss of an electron or of a hydrogen. Reduction is gain, and it's always going to be hydrogen that you're looking for. So let's take a look at this reaction. Glucose, what happened to it? It lost its hydrogen. The hydrogen left. Therefore, my glucose became oxidized. Notice my oxygen, what happened to it? It gained the hydrogen. Reduction is gain. And so that's our reduced. So if you don't see charges, just follow the hydrogens. The one that picks up hydrogens is oxidized. The one that loses hydrogens, the one that loses hydrogens is oxidized. The one that picks up hydrogens is reduced. If it gains, it's reduced. Reduction is gain. One last comment, and this is we're done for today, and I'm going to have you do something I'll show you in a sec. One of the things they talk about in the lab, and we're going to talk about in this chapter, is a coenzyme. Actually, 2 of them, NAD and FAD. This is NAD, it has two forms. It can be seen as an AD or an ADH. And FAD has another form, which is FADH2. They happen to be hydrogen carriers. Which form of NADH would be the oxidized form? A or B? Which one is oxidized? A. So if you were asked which form of NADH is oxidized, remember what I told you. Look for the hydrogens. The hydrogens, this is our reduced. This one actually has a positive charge when it's oxidized. So you can actually look at the charge also. FAD doesn't have a charge though. So this would be our oxidized form, and this would be our reduced. Just look for the hydrogen. The side with the hydrogen is reduced. Make sense? We'll practice it a lot more, but that's just sort of an overview and introduction.
Why is it called reduced when it reduces?
Because it's because here's why.